Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CG podcast, where we explore the legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic on science, society, and public health policy. I'm delighted to have our guest here today, Barbara Katz Rothman, who's a professor of sociology at City University in New York. She's widely known for her medical sociology research, particularly around childbirth and midwifery, but lots of other areas that she's dabbled in over the years. She's the author of a recent book published during the COVID pandemic called The Biomedical Empire, Lessons Learned from the COVID-19 Pandemic. Delighted to have you with us today, Barbara.
Lovely to be here.
So let's dive right in here. The Biomedical Empire. So why the term and what does this mean?
Okay, I'll tell you where it actually started. I'm very much part of the social construction of reality approach in sociology, that medicine is socially constructed and all of that. One day I was chatting with a woman who was actually one of my doctoral students decades ago, Wendy Simonds, and I said, it's just a kind of irritated voice, social construction, it's so passive, as if it's just happening. And I forgot I said it. Wendy included it in her book, Hospital Land. I'm reading Hospital Land and I go, wow, that's smart. And I thought, like, medicine is not just socially constructed, it's a power that's constructing itself. And I started seriously thinking about it that way. And I started thinking about, don't just think in the borders of the US, think about the planet. And I started to realize that medicine functions very much like a colonizing power, an imperial power, an empire. And so mostly we think of empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire. But what I started just looking, what are the essential qualities of an empire? One, obviously, the economic. So, medicine, it's questionable whether it is the single largest financial power on the planet. But if you add all its pieces together, yeah, not just the pharmacy business, but the whole deal. It is a mega industry financially. There's what we call governmentality, the right to rule. So like trans people are saying now, they want their birth certificates changed from female to male or male to female, but they need medical authority. Guys, you all have your sex assigned to you by a medical professional. You can't have a birth certificate if you don't get a medical person to sign it. The mere fact that you were born and your parents swear that you don't exist until you get a medically approved birth certificate. And you don't die without one. Grandpa hasn't answering the phone for a whole day, 2 days, and you go and bang on the door and there's no answer and you break in and you find Grandpa's rotting, pieces dripping off. Do not gather the family and bury him. You will be in more trouble than you ever imagined. You have to have it medically declared as dead. A medical person has to come in, usually a doctor. It was almost amusing during COVID. There weren't enough doctors, so they said 2 nurses could equal 1 doctor declaring a death. But anyway, medically declared. So
I'm just going to interject on that point because I looked this up during COVID, but you can bury your loved one on your property, but you do have to get it medically certified.
No, totally. I mean, you can bury it, but you do have to get them medically certified. You can't just say that it was rotted. Of course he was dead. A doctor would say he's dead. Yeah. And this empires also have some notion of belief, of almost a religious thing. Well, if I had a nickel for every person who said, well, I believe in screening for whatever, or, doing my mammograms, or the belief element is inordinately powerful. And, we have to have a medical person present when someone dies. People get really uncomfortable if there isn't a medical person. It functions like a religion. It is not to say it doesn't do some good. I mean, the Romans built some great roads. The British Empire did a few good things, actually. But that doesn't make them not an empire. So I began to realize that medicine functions like an imperial power. All the world. Start thinking about it that way.
Right. No, it's a great metaphor or like heuristic to think about power, right? The empire. And so you start the book by talking about a moment of crisis because empires or states or corporations, there's often something, moments of crisis bring benefits, opportunities. So how did you sort of think about COVID in relationship to the biomedical empire?
Okay, total moment of truth. I had this biomedical empire project worked on for years. I was really crazy by it. Whenever like a publisher asked me to edit a book on medical social, I said, let's use this. He said, oh no, that's too radical. When I tried to publish stuff on it, was like, oh no. Thinking of medicine is oh no, that's too radical. With COVID, all of a sudden you could see it. Medicine, the power of the biomedical empire made it illegal for you to walk out of your house. You couldn't do things that you could have done last week. And that was because medically determined. So actually, the existence of the empire became clear to people in positive and negative ways with COVID. That power became, you couldn't ignore it anymore. You had to see it. So it's not that I first thought that way, but I understand what I was saying. So yeah, COVID made the power, the global power that is medicine, very obvious to all kinds of people. And it used that power in extraordinary ways.
Absolutely. So you make you discuss briefly in the book the relationship between public health and medicine, right? And so you're saying medical power, but we could say, oh, it wasn't medical power, or it was predominantly public health power. But you actually provide some interesting ways of thinking about public health. Do you want to expand on that?
When I'm doing graduate seminars and stuff, we've gotten to the point where if somebody says healthcare, we all laugh. I've been saying what we call healthcare is medical services. Health would be about clean water, fresh air, healthy food, blah, blah, blah. That's not what you're getting when you walk into a doctor's office. You're not getting health. You're getting medical services. And it's not care, it's services. And so I think we have to stop thinking about health care. Public health has done some wonderful things, checking those fountains, those wells that were causing epidemics and closing them down was brilliant. But the way things are going now, the world of public health is telling you to drink bottled water. I mean, it is so sold out to the large financial powers. And medicine has so taken it over that I think an independent public health is kind of hard to find. It's become, in some ways, the voice of the medical empire.
Was this golden age of public health did it ever really exist, or was it a very short-lived sort of almost fantasy? Because if you go back historically and you look at the building of nation states in Europe, public health, was absolutely interlinked with empire or the colonial enterprise, right? And so we often have this notion of public health being this very benign, friendly, sort of old grandmother-like entity. But I mean, what do you think?
Well, like old grandmas, there's also a power issue involved. And yeah, there were moments. It did some wonderful things. I mean, I live in New York City. The insisting that buildings, we said the tenements with no windows and whatever, insisting, no, buildings have to have windows. You can't give people apartments that don't have windows. I'm in. It's a good idea. How much money that made for the building industry? Woohoo. So it is complicated, okay? It's like medicine itself. I'm not saying it doesn't do good, but it's complicated, and you have to understand it as the power, the empire that it is, and the way it colonizes. I mean, we mostly talk about colonizing being about the land, but it's not. It's also about the knowledge. Maybe I wrote it in the book, I don't remember anymore, but the funny thing about the discovery of coffee by Western explorers.
No, I don't.
I saw some goats acting nuts. And people were like, what is with those goats? I said, oh, they're eating that plant. And like, And they looked at it, caffeine. Well, what do you do with this? They showed them how. And coffee became an enormous industry. And some of them grown in those colonial places, some not. But they're not making money off of the coffee industry the way you would think they would if they owned it. So it's colonizing the knowledge. And I think that's what's happened very much with medicine. I mean, the simple and most obvious example, the vaccine. Great, we've got a vaccine, really important, COVID, la, la, la. When I ask people, what's the history of the vaccine? They tell me it was invented by Jenner. Well, you know this, but I bet many of the people listening don't. Jenner was a British guy, and he noticed that the milkmaids, the women who milk the cows, sometimes got this disease from the cows. We call it cowpox. And they realized when smallpox came around, they didn't get it. So they started doing this thing, like take one of the sores from the cowpox, scratch it, scratch your kid, rub a little of the cowpox into it. They get a little bit of a rash, and then the smallpox epidemic happens and they're fine. Well, Jenna thought, wow, that's interesting. So he tested it out on a servant's child, not himself or his own child. And it worked, and he invented the vaccine. Vax is Latin for cow.
Mm.
These milkmaids, did they get any credit? No, thank you. He invented it. We have knowledge that people used. The docs are now talking as if Caesar couldn't have been born by cesarean section because his mother was alive when he was a middle-aged man.
Mm.
Well, come on. In many cultures, women are the ones who cut up the meat for food. Women are the ones who take the hide and sew it into something. Do you think those women seeing somebody dying with a baby that couldn't get out, watch them both die? Or do you think they didn't take the knife and the needle and thread and see what they could do? So women, midwives, invented that stuff. People had lots of knowledge.
So
it would be illegal. It'd be practicing medicine without a license to do anything.
Right. Right. So your argument here about the empire is that it standardizes, right? It formalizes, it makes products as well. And it creates uniformity, right? And out of like let's say the sort of multiplicity of different practices that people kind of do or whatever, create standards, expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it does some of that. Sometimes you'll see variations, country to country, culture to culture, about what's standard and what's not. Some cultures are faster about, like, they used to do screening for prostate cancer, and more people died of the screening results than of prostate cancer. Apparently, almost every man has prostate cancer if he lives to 90, but it doesn't kill them. But the screening, so some countries were, yes, screen everybody. And other countries were, wait a minute, hold the phone, and didn't do it. So there's variation, but profit everywhere. Okay.
So to play devil's advocate here, let's say, okay, the Biomedical Empire, you've said it does really good things. It does, the marvelous ability to create technology or whatever. We can list lots of things here, right? So how did COVID reveal, let's say, the darker side of the empire or the blind spots of the empire?
I'm not sure that it really did, because I think most people think it saved us. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The invention of the vaccine, great. I'm glad. I got my vaccine shots, all that. But there was a lot of talk about other vaccines that were available that seemed to work for COVID that were super cheap, but nobody tested them or did anything with them. We can invent a new one. So the interest of the industry were to create a new product and not see what else might work. So we don't really know. There was a lot of discussion about how shifts in air circulation to make the air circulation more like it is on an airplane, where the air goes up and is filtered before it comes back down again, that would work. And it was tried in some places. It really seemed to work. But I actually heard people who were suggesting that say, look, I want you to understand, I'm not affiliated with the industry. Whereas people say, you need to get a vaccine, never say, I'm not affiliated with medicine.
Right.
It's one of our blessings to do this. And anybody else, well, I don't know, why should we trust you? Maybe you're just out for the money. Maybe you don't know what you're doing. But medicine. And even those masks, it was like costume design from the surgery department. They even made them in medical colors. I mean, it took over so well and so fast and so completely. And it worked. I mean, the vaccine worked. That I don't think the opportunity to really question it arose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of that actually is there's huge advertising campaigns that the government paid, hundreds of millions of dollars to media outlets, to, celebrities, et cetera, to sort of push out the product and safe and effective narrative, et cetera. So
the medical empire just ruled. And there wasn't an opportunity to see what else might have happened. So we didn't all die of COVID. I guess it won. But might it have worked another way? You'll never know.
Okay. In the book, you talk about, I mean, these are areas that you've done research on in the past and, pre-COVID on birth and death. So can you give us a sense of how you approach those two topics in relationship to the biomedical empire? Because I think that provides maybe some examples along the darker side that I was kind of getting at.
Birth is a really good example. We wouldn't be here if people couldn't give birth. I mean, it's just birth worked before we invented medicine. So people knew how to do it. There were midwives. Every culture has midwives, traditional. I'm not talking about invented nurse midwives, but every culture had kind of a consolidation of knowledge. I mean, I've watched it happen in communities. Somebody gives birth and somebody's there with them. And then the next time somebody's giving birth, hey, Sally, you were here. Could you come in and see this one? Eventually, Sally's attended 30 births. One of them, a shoulder got stuck. She figured it out. Sometime later, shoulder's getting stuck. Hey, call Sally. So communities invent midwifery, and the knowledge gets put into a few people. Like, not everybody knows how to make bread or grind wheat into flour, but that knowledge exists in every community, and it gets passed down, every bread-eating community. So every community had that knowledge about how to manage birth, how to manage difficult births, all of that. When medicine took over, you're not allowed to do any of that. It's practicing medicine without a license. And
it's dangerous.
What happened was, of course, COVID actually let people see this. If you take all kinds of people and you put them, some of them are really sick, in a small enclosed space, guess what happens? They get sick. So we had the development of what's called postpartum fever, puerperal fever, and the surgeons, there was a certain pride in being marked with the blood that you had done the work. So they wore these jackets and it had the blood and the pus on it from the autopsy they just did. And then they did a delivery, and then and the word delivery is hilarious. You don't deliver the baby. The woman birthed it. I have in newspapers and all kinds of things delivered. I gave birth. There's nothing in common with those two activities. But the language of the doctor delivers the baby. So fevers spread like crazy. And Semmelweis, the doctor who said, I think we're spreading the fevers, he ended up in an insane asylum because medicine does no wrong. Can't you read?
Yeah.
So the dangers that medicine posed around birth did not get acknowledged. As birth moved into the hospital, infection rates went up, death rates went up, but they sold the idea that it's so much safer. And now we're seeing like pretty much a third, more or less, around the world of all babies being born surgically. But we know that has both short and long-term dangers. We have infections spread in hospitals. It's not safer. We don't have the data to show it's safer, but we think it's safer. So medicine just colonized birth.
And then it's also colonizing death, I suppose, with the development of care homes. And how do you discuss death in the book? And do you reflect also on, I mean, I think you're based in New York City, right? So that was obviously a big thing recently on the news with Como, I think, and, the sort of nursing home policy that he had.
Yeah, I mean, I think I call them the gates of life, that, coming and going in life, it's marked by a hospital parking lot. You're not allowed to come or go without going through that unless you fight hard. The turning of death into a medical event, I mean, death is really a heavy deal. I just lost my mother a few days ago. I've lost a son, I've lost a husband. I mean, I've lost people in my life. I lost a father when I was a child. I mean, I get it. Death is big. And people need something bigger than themselves when they're dealing with the death. Traditionally, historically, that's been one of the big things religion did. So if somebody's dying, you call a priest or a rabbi or whoever, and they help you deal with that huge, unthinkable, unimaginable. I mean, in birth, one person turns into two, and then one person turns into none, into meat on the table. And so they're both unthinkable. Medicine kind of stepped in. And I was talking about this a decade ago with a class, and one of the women in the class said, this is not quite funny, but funny. Her mother is a hospice nurse. So people who said they want to die at home, everybody agrees. Auntie Sue wants to die at home. Let's let her die at home. And the family is gathered around. and Auntie Sue's just going like that, and somebody calls 911 for an ambulance to come.
Right.
And so her mother was a hospice worker and said, okay, just call me. Call me. I'll come anytime, day or night. And she said what she would do is put on a stethoscope, almost like it was a rosary. And she would sit there medically garbed to say, this is normal. This is what happens. She's going peacefully. Hold her hand. Talk with her. But if a medical person did that, people stayed still. If you brought in a priest, they still were calling 911. So medicine, and that's part of what I mean by this sort of religious piece of it. Medicine took over death the way it took over birth.
Yeah.
And with birth, it made it demonstrably worse. With death, I mean, they're dead at the end anyway. It made it take longer and be more painful and grow sickly, and you could cure them 3 times before they died, and so stretch it out. But it governed that gate of life.
Yeah, and I would say we also have an odd relationship with death in general, and that really came out during COVID. And I think you touch upon this in the dying section of your book. But I'm in the UK, and I was in a pub, and there was a lady. She was in her sort of maybe 60s or 70s, talking to her friend, and she was like grieving the death of her dad during COVID. And she's saying something along the lines of, I can't believe he died of COVID. He had so much life left in him. And it turns out he was like 95 years old. Right. And so like this idea that there could have been done, we should have done more to save, grandpa who's 95 from COVID. I mean, it's a really interesting cultural sort of commentary, right? On like how we extend life and how we understand the passing of life.
Yeah, it's complicated. If you truly love somebody and they're dying, I don't expect you to be most rational, large scale understanding. Okay, you're allowed. Say what you need to say, do what you need to do. Losing someone you love is just hard, which is why every culture has created something about it. Okay, so the notion of heaven, you're not losing him, he's in heaven, you'll see him again. Some people can believe that. It makes them. Every culture has created some way to make you deal with it better. We didn't do that so much. Okay, religion is not as dominating a force in the U.S. or the U.K. as it has been in many places around the world over time. And medicine, whatever you want to call it, that empire kind of stepped in.
Yeah.
And right. Yeah, you could have granted him another few months or whatever. And no, if you have a reasonably healthy 94-year-old person who's doing okay and living independently, and they on something on the stairs and fall down and break their neck, and you left that day, of course you can say, why did I leave that? They could have had another 94, whatever, they're going to die anyway. No, if you made them trip and die, you're going to feel bad.
Okay, so last question here, Barbara. Thinking about the pandemic, sort of the fact that we're out of it now, and kind of thinking of the legacy of your critique about biomedicine. Do you think that we've society in the U.S. that people have kind of seen let's say the limitations of the biomedical empire and the way that it governs life and or birth and death and everything in between? Or what are your thoughts?
I think in some way it did both. For some people, it really increased their faith in that empire. Like, oh my God, if it hadn't been that, we'd all be dead of COVID, and it saved us. And make sure you get your kids to the doctor every 6 weeks or whatever. We all need more medical exams and blah, blah, blah. For some people, it did that. And for other people, it was, wow, those people messed up badly. There were a lot of deaths that didn't have to happen. Look at what happened at nursing homes. People who realized it was so dangerous to go into the hospital to have the baby. Maybe I should just try a home birth. And then realize even when there's no COVID epidemic, there are germs running all over hospitals. They're dangerous places to be, et cetera. So I think and this is the U.S. story, it gets pretty divided. There's not that much united about the United States, and I don't mean that state by state, but there's a lot of genuine disagreement about how COVID was managed, and I think it made it, both sides became more extreme, that we really owe everything to medicine, and wow, medicine failed us.
Right. So maybe there's a lot written on the polarization of the pandemic in the US, right? But the problem with those, let's say, polls, right? There are Democrats and people from across the political spectrum that were skeptical of the COVID response, right? It's just that predominantly Republicans were more skeptical. Maybe another way to think about it is who had faith in the biomedical empire and who lacks faith in the biomedical empire.
Yeah, and why and how and a lot of life history stuff. I mean, this isn't just about Democrat and Republican.
Yeah.
It's much more complicated than that.
Right.
And people's feelings about the ability of medicine to save us really varies enormously. And I think it built on that with COVID.
Yeah.
The relation got stronger.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in one more question here, because I'm curious about the reception of the book, and getting back to your first comment. You were trying to publish this idea pre-COVID, and you were kind of struggling finding a publisher that thought it was really like timely or whatever it was. But your critique here, getting back to the roots of medical sociology, and particularly Ivan Illich's work, medical nemesis, and these ideas, right, that really took hold in the 50s and 60s. Do you feel like younger students in medical sociology, in the classes that you're teaching in the university system, are aware of these critiques, and that they go back quite, decades?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about teaching undergrads. I'm not much there, and it's not what I mostly do. So it was doctoral students in sociology, and a lot of them in medical sociology. I had the opportunity to meet Ivan Illich a few times, and Irv Zola, and a lot of those classic people. It's being old. I knew those people and their work. And I think that's been there in medical sociology. The critique of medicine is part of what medical sociology is about, is looking at it as a system, and it's running in its own interests. And sometimes that matches the interests of its patients, and sometimes not so much. And that's sociologists see systems. So I don't think there was anything shocking about this for the systems people. We got it.
Yeah.
And the problem I was having was trying to publish it. I mean, it wasn't killing myself to publish this, but it was there as an idea. And somebody wanted an undergraduate book on medical sociology. Oh, it's too radical.
Oh, okay. That was the issue. Okay.
Students got it. People in sociology get it. We do see the system. It's what I love about sociology.
Right.
Right. A tune in my office, my undergraduate office, that's a goldfish bowl. And a big goldfish is saying to a little one, you can grow up to be anything you want to be. That's kind of America. Right? There's a bowl. Did you notice? There's a system. There's a container. And we prefer not to see that. And so, yeah, I think part of what happened with COVID is a lot of people bumped against that wall and started to see the system.
Great. Good food for thought there. Thanks so much for joining us, Barbara. And pleasure talking to you.
Lovely. Thank you.